When hunter Ezra Blackwood knelt beside the giant oak tree and brushed away 25 years of dirt and leaves, he never expected to find a perfectly preserved Bible. But there it was, sealed between the twisted roots like the earth itself had been keeping it safe. The name on the cover made his blood run cold. Sister Magdalena Wright. Everyone in Millbrook County knew that name. Sister Magdalena was the black nun who disappeared without a trace on Halloween night, 1977. One day, she was teaching children at the Catholic school. The next day, she was gone forever. Police said she left town for a family emergency. But people whispered darker stories. They said she had been asking dangerous questions about missing children. They said powerful men wanted her silenced. Now, 25 years later, her Bible had emerged from its earthen grave with a desperate message hidden inside. If you find this, know that some truths are worth dying for. The children must be protected. Sister Magdalena hadn't run away. She had been murdered for trying to save innocent children from monsters who hid behind respected names and friendly smiles. But who killed the brave nun who refused to stay quiet? And what terrible secret was worth murdering a woman of God to keep buried? The October morning air bit at Ezra Blackwood's face as he walked deeper into the Tennessee woods than he'd ever gone before. Something felt different today, after 30 years of hunting. These same trails, he usually knew exactly where his feet would take him, but today it was like an invisible hand was pulling him forward. His grandfather's old rifle hung heavy on his shoulder. Earl Blackwood had taught him to hunt in these very woods when Ezra was just 8 years old. Now, at 50, Ezra could track a deer through the thickest brush and shoot a squirrel from 100 yards away. But today, he wasn't thinking about hunting. The leaves crunched under his worn leather boots as he walked past the familiar oak trees and hickories. Red and gold leaves fell like confetti around him. This was his favorite time of year, when the world seemed to hold its breath before winter arrived. Then he saw it. An enormous oak tree stood before him, bigger than any he'd seen in these woods. Its trunk was so wide that 3 grown men couldn't wrap their arms around it. The roots twisted out of the ground like giant fingers, creating caves and hollows in the dark earth. Ezra stopped walking. Something was glinting between those twisted roots. Something that didn't belong in the forest. He knelt down and brushed away 30 years of fallen leaves. His hands, rough from years of outdoor work, moved carefully through the dirt and debris. When his fingers touched leather, his heart started beating faster. It was a book, but not just any book. Ezra lifted it from its hiding place between the roots. The leather cover was black and perfectly preserved, as if it had been sealed away from rain and snow and time itself. Gold letters spelled out words that made his blood run cold. Sister Magdalena Wright. Everyone in Millbrook County knew that name. Even people who'd moved to town after 1977 had heard the stories whispered in diners and barbershops. Sister Magdalena was the black nun who disappeared 25 years ago on Halloween night. One day, she was teaching children at the Catholic school. The next day, she was gone without a trace. Some people said she'd run away with a man. Others claimed she'd been killed by someone she'd made angry. A few folks whispered that she'd discovered something terrible and been silenced before she could tell anyone. But nobody really knew what happened to Sister Magdalena Wright. Until now. Ezra's hands shook as he opened the Bible's cover. Tucked inside the front page was a letter, folded carefully and written in beautiful handwriting. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were still clear. If you find this, know that some truths are worth dying for. The children must be protected. Look for the silver locket beneath the third stone from the altar. M.W. Ezra read the letter 3 times before the words really sank in. Sister Magdalena had hidden this Bible on purpose. She'd known something terrible was going to happen to her, and she'd left a message for whoever found it. What children was she talking about? What truth had been worth dying for? He turned the pages carefully. Every margin was filled with notes in the same elegant handwriting. Names, dates, and words that made his stomach turn. Tommy, Hendricks, missing 3 weeks. Lucy Chen, returned, home, silent, and afraid. Dr. Thornton's car seen near the woods. This wasn't just a Bible. It was evidence. Evidence of what? Ezra wasn't sure yet. But Sister Magdalena had been investigating something dangerous enough that someone had killed her to keep it secret. The wind picked up, rattling the oak's branches above his head. For just a moment, Ezra could have sworn he heard a woman's voice calling for help. But when he looked around, the forest was empty except for the falling leaves. He closed the Bible and held it against his chest. After 25 years buried in the earth, Sister Magdalena Wright was finally ready to tell her story. But would anyone believe it? And more importantly, would anyone be brave enough to seek justice for a nun who'd been silenced a quarter-century ago? As Ezra walked back toward his truck, he didn't notice the black sedan parked on the dirt road half a mile away. He didn't see the man with binoculars watching him through the trees. Some secrets, the man thought as he started his engine, were meant to stay buried. But Sister Magdalena's Bible was already beginning to speak. That evening, Ezra sat at his kitchen table with the Bible open under a bright lamp. Every page told a story that made his chest feel tight. Sister Magdalena hadn't just been a nun teaching children. She'd been a detective, investigating something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The first entry was dated September 15, 1976. Arrived in Millbrook today. The diocese sent me to run the Catholic school, but I can already see why they really needed someone here. This town has secrets written in the shadows on every street corner. Ezra turned the page and found himself reading about a woman who didn't belong in 1976 Millbrook County, Tennessee. Sister Magdalena Wright was 28 years old, the first black nun most white townspeople had ever seen. She came from Chicago, where she'd worked with poor families and street children. The Catholic Church needed someone to teach at their small school. The last teacher had quit. Suddenly, claiming the job was too stressful. The diocese sent Sister Magdalena despite knowing that Millbrook was not a welcoming place for anyone who looked different. She rented a tiny apartment above Murphy's General Store on Main Street. Mrs. Agnes Murphy, a widow with silver hair and kind eyes, was one of the few people who smiled when Sister Magdalena walked into town. "Mrs. Murphy brought me soup tonight," Sister Magdalena had written. She said, "Pay them no mind, sister. Some folks in this town forgot how to see people's hearts instead of their skin color. I think I'll like Mrs. Murphy very much." But most of Millbrook didn't roll out the welcome mat. Sister Magdalena wrote about customers who stopped talking when she walked into stores, about parents who pulled their children away when she tried to say hello on the street. About anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, with voices hissing ugly words. None of that stopped her from doing her job. Sister Magdalena threw herself into teaching the 32 children at St. Mary's Catholic School. She taught reading and math and science, but she also taught something more important. She taught the children that every person mattered, no matter what they looked like or how much money their parents had. Little Maria Santos speaks only Spanish at home, one entry read. The other children were making fun of her accent. Today, I taught the whole class to say hello and thank you in Spanish. Maria's face lit up like Christmas morning. Tommy Hendricks comes to school hungry most days. His mother works 3 jobs but still can't afford much food. I've been keeping crackers and apples in my desk drawer. Tommy thinks. The other children don't notice, but kindness shared quietly is often the most powerful kind. But as the months passed, Sister Magdalena began noticing something disturbing. Children were disappearing. Not permanently, not in ways that made headlines. They would simply stop coming to school for weeks at a time. When they returned, they were different, quiet, afraid. They jumped when adults spoke to them and had nightmares that kept them awake at night. The first child was Tommy Hendricks, 8 years old, with red hair and freckles that made him look younger than his age. His mother, Sarah, cleaned houses for wealthy families around town. One October morning, Tommy didn't show up for school. Mrs. Hendricks says Tommy is visiting relatives, but her eyes don't match her words. There are no relatives. Something has happened to that little boy. 3 weeks later, Tommy came back to school, but he wasn't the same child who had left. The boy who used to laugh at everything now sat silent at his desk. He wouldn't play with the other children. He wet himself twice during class and cried when Sister Magdalena tried to comfort him. Tommy whispers things that break my heart, Sister Magdalena wrote. He says, "The man with the silver watch told me I'd die if I said anything." What man? What is Tommy so afraid to tell? Then it happened to Lucy Chen. She was 6 years old, the daughter of the town's only Chinese family. Her parents ran the laundry on Oak Street, working 16 hours a day to make ends meet. Lucy was tiny for her age, but had the biggest smile in the whole school, until she disappeared for a month. When Lucy returned, she was like a different child. She had nightmares every night that made her scream in her sleep. She wet herself whenever certain cars drove past the school. She would hide under her desk when she heard men's voices in the hallway. Lucy's parents speak very little English, so they can't tell me what happened. But Lucy draws pictures that make me sick to my stomach. Pictures of dark rooms and scary men and things no 6-year-old should ever see. Sister Magdalena realized she was seeing a pattern. The missing children all came from families that the powerful people in town looked down on. Poor families like the Hendricks, immigrant families like the Chens, black families from the other side of town who were barely tolerated in Millbrooks, white churches and schools. She began keeping detailed notes about each case. She visited families after dark, bringing food and medicine, and most importantly, listening to their fears without judging them. I went to see Mrs. Chen tonight. She doesn't trust the police, doesn't trust the doctors, doesn't trust anyone in authority, but she trusts me. Through broken English and many tears, she told me that Lucy was taken by important men for medical treatment that lasted far too long. When Lucy came home, she wouldn't let any man touch her, not even her own father. The more Sister Magdalena investigated, the more horrified she became. The trail led to some of Millbrook's most respected citizens. Judge Harrison Caldwell, who owned half the county and whose family had been powerful for 3 generations. Police Chief Bob Garrison, who seemed to lose paperwork whenever poor families tried to report crimes. Dr. Wesley Thornton, whose expensive black car was seen near the woods where frightened children later turned up. These weren't random crimes. This was an organized network of powerful men who used their positions to hurt the most vulnerable children in town. They knew that poor families and immigrant families wouldn't be believed if they tried to tell anyone what happened. Sister Magdalena began documenting everything. She took photographs when she could. She recorded conversations secretly. She knew she needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or destroyed by the very people she was trying to expose. But someone was watching her, too. Strange cars began parking outside her apartment at night. Her mail started arriving opened, with letters missing. The phone calls got worse, with voices threatening to hurt her if she didn't mind her own business. Mrs. Murphy noticed Sister Magdalena's growing fear. "Child, you're shaking like a leaf in the wind. What's got you so scared?" "I can't tell you everything, Mrs. Murphy, but if something happens to me, know that I was trying to protect the children. All the children, no matter what color they are or how much money their families have." 3 days before Halloween, Sister Magdalena made a trip to the cathedral in Nashville, an hour's drive from Millbrook. She needed to confess what she'd discovered to someone in authority who might be able to help. Father O'Brien listened to her story with growing alarm. "Sister, these are very serious accusations against very important men. Do you have solid proof of what you're saying?" "I have names, dates, photographs, witness statements. It's all documented. But Father, I think they know I'm getting close to exposing them. I'm scared they're going to try to stop me." "Where is all this evidence?" "Hidden where they'll never find it. If something happens to me, someone else will discover it, eventually." Father O'Brien's face grew grave. "Perhaps you should request a transfer, sister. Leave Millbrook quietly and let someone else handle this investigation." Sister Magdalena shook her head firmly. "I can't abandon these children. They have no one else to speak for them. Someone has to stand up to these powerful men, even if it costs me everything." That was the last time anyone from the church saw Sister Magdalena Wright alive. She had 4 days left to live. October 31st, 1977. Halloween night in Millbrook County felt different than other years. The autumn wind howled through the trees like it was warning everyone to stay inside. Children finished their trick-or-treating early. Parents locked their doors and turned off their porch lights before 9 o'clock. Sister Magdalena sat in her small apartment above Murphy's General Store, writing by candlelight. The electricity had been cut off that morning. The phone line had gone dead around noon. She wasn't surprised. They were getting ready to make their move. Her small suitcase sat packed by the door. Not because she was running away, but because tonight was the night she would finally expose the truth. A journalist in Nashville had promised to publish her story, no matter how powerful the men involved might be. All she had to do was get there alive. At exactly 9 o'clock, Sister Magdalena heard footsteps on the wooden stairs that led to her apartment. Heavy boots. More than one person. She counted at least 3 sets of feet climbing slowly toward her door. Working quickly, She wrapped her Bible in oilcloth along with her most important evidence. Inside were photographs that would destroy reputations, witness statements that would send men to prison, and a complete list of names that reached into the highest levels of Millbrook society. The footsteps stopped outside her door. A knock came, then another, harder. "Sister Wright, this is the police. We need to speak with you about a complaint." She recognized Police Chief Bob Garrison's voice, but there were other men with him. Men who definitely weren't police officers. Sister Magdalena didn't answer. Instead, she slipped quietly to the back window that opened onto the fire escape. The old metal stairs groaned under her weight, but the howling wind covered the sound. She could hear them breaking down her front door as she reached the alley behind the store. Her car was parked 2 blocks away on Elm Street. If she could reach it without being seen, she might be able to drive to Nashville and tell her story before they could stop her. She ran through the shadows, her black nun's habit catching on fence posts and thorn bushes. Behind her, she could hear shouting, voices and the beams of flashlights cutting through the darkness. Dogs began barking. Car engines started. Sister Magdalena reached her small blue Ford and fumbled with her keys, hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the lock. The engine turned over just as headlights flooded her rear window. The chase began. She drove toward the highway that would take her to Nashville, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. Her little car wasn't built for high speeds, but fear gave her courage. In her rearview mirror, she could see at least 3 sets of headlights following her. They weren't just police cars. There were expensive sedans, too, the kind that Judge Caldwell and Dr. Thornton drove around town like kings surveying their kingdom. Sister Magdalena knew every back road in the county from her visits to poor families who lived in the woods and hollers. She turned off the main highway onto a dirt path that wound deep into the forest. Maybe she could lose them in the maze of logging roads that crisscrossed the mountains. But her pursuers knew these roads too. They'd grown up here, hunted here, done terrible things here, under cover of darkness. Her car hit a deep pothole and bounced violently. The steering wheel jerked in her hands. She could hear the engine making strange noises as rocks and branches scraped the bottom of the car. Finally, her Ford got stuck in a creek bed where the autumn rains had washed out the road. The engine died with a hiss of steam and grinding metal. Sister Magdalena grabbed her wrapped Bible and ran into the woods on foot. Behind her, she could hear car doors slamming and men shouting orders to each other. The enormous oak tree loomed ahead of her through the darkness, its massive trunk wider than a house. Ancient and strong, it had stood in this forest for hundreds of years, watching over secrets that men buried and time forgot. Sister Magdalena could hear them crashing through the underbrush, getting closer with every second. Flashlight beams swept back and forth, searching for her hiding place. With desperate hands, she dug at the base of the oak tree, creating a hollow between its twisted roots. The earth was soft from recent rains. She wrapped her Bible more tightly in the oilcloth and pushed it deep into the hole, then covered it with soil and fallen leaves. "Please, God," she whispered, pressing her hand against the rough bark. "Let someone find this. Someday. Let them know what happened to those innocent children." Heavy footsteps approached through the fallen leaves. "Sister Wright!" Judge Harrison Caldwell's voice rang out, smooth and cultured, like he was calling her name at a church social. "There's no point in running, my dear. Come out and we can discuss this like civilized people." Sister Magdalena pressed herself against the oak's trunk, heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. "We know you've been asking questions around town," Dr. Wesley Thornton called from somewhere in the darkness, "making trouble where none existed before. These are very serious accusations against respected members of our community." "The children know the truth," Sister Magdalena whispered, though she knew they couldn't hear her. "God knows the truth." A rough hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. Police Chief Bob Garrison's face appeared in the beam of his flashlight, twisted with anger and fear. "Found her." 3 more men emerged from the shadows. Judge Caldwell, tall and distinguished even in the middle of a dark forest. Dr. Thornton, his expensive coat torn by thorns. 2 other men she recognized but had never expected to see here. They dragged her away from the oak tree, away from her buried Bible, and the evidence that could destroy them all. "What did you do with all that so-called evidence?" Judge Caldwell demanded, his cultured voice now cold as winter. "What evidence?" Sister Magdalena replied, though her eyes betrayed the lie. "The Bible lay hidden just 20 feet away, keeping its secrets safe in the earth. Search her. Search everywhere around here." They went through her pockets, searched the area around the tree, even looked inside her abandoned car. But they found nothing. The Bible remained sealed in its earthen tomb, waiting for someone to discover its truth. "You're making a mistake," Sister Magdalena said, as they forced her toward their cars. "Those children deserve justice. They deserve to be believed." "Those children," Judge Caldwell said with a cruel smile, "will learn to keep their mouths shut, just like you should have." As they pushed her into the back seat of a black sedan, Sister Magdalena looked back at the oak tree one final time. Someday, she thought, someone would find her message. Someone would speak for the children she couldn't save. But she would never see that day. The cars disappeared into the Halloween night, carrying Sister Magdalena right toward a fate that would remain secret for 25 years. The oak tree stood silent witness, guarding its buried treasure, until a hunter named Ezra Blackwood would one day set the truth free. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, marking the end of Halloween and the beginning of November. Aun was also the beginning of a quarter-century of lies that would finally end when Sister Magdalena's Bible found its voice again. The morning after Halloween, Millbrook County woke up to the biggest lie it had ever been told. Sister Wright received an emergency call from her family. Police Chief Bob Garrison announced to anyone who asked questions, "Personal crisis up north. Had to leave town immediately. The diocese is handling all the details." But Agnes Murphy knew something was terribly wrong. She had been awake all night, listening to car engines racing through the streets and men shouting in the distance. When she looked out her window around midnight, she saw 3 black cars driving fast toward the old quarry road. The next morning, she climbed the stairs to Sister Magdalena's apartment. The door hung off its hinges, splintered wood scattered across the floor. There were dark stains on the fire escape that looked suspiciously like blood. "That sweet girl wouldn't leave without saying goodbye to me," Agnes told her neighbor, Martha Webb, as they stood looking at the destroyed apartment. "Something terrible has happened." But who would believe 2 old women against the word of the police chief? By noon, a crew of men had arrived to clean up Sister Magdalena's apartment. They worked quickly and quietly, removing every trace that she had ever lived there. Her furniture disappeared. Her personal belongings vanished. Even the small rose bush she had planted outside her window was dug up and thrown away. The Catholic diocese sent a replacement teacher within the week. Father Mackenzie was a 70-year-old Irish priest who asked no questions and caused no trouble. He taught the children their lessons and kept his mouth shut about everything else. The small school continued operating as if Sister Magdalena Wright had never existed. But the families of the missing children knew better. They waited for her to come back because she had promised to help them. She had been the only adult in Millbrook who listened to their fears and believed their stories. Sarah Hendricks sat on her front porch every evening, watching the road that led into town. Sister Magdalena said she would protect Tommy. She told anyone who would listen. She wouldn't abandon us. Something bad happened to her. Mrs. Chen didn't speak much English, but she understood betrayal in any language. She had trusted the kind black nun who brought soup to her family and spoke gentle words to her. Frightened. Daughter. Now that Nun was gone and Lucy's nightmares were getting worse every night. Weeks turned into months. The missing children cases were quietly closed and filed away. No one investigated anymore. No one seemed to care that vulnerable children had been hurt and their protector had vanished. But Agnes Murphy noticed changes in the men who had made Sister Magdalena disappear. Judge Harrison Caldwell, who used to host fancy dinner parties and give speeches at every town event, became withdrawn and nervous. He stopped attending church services. He stopped hosting his famous Christmas party, where all the important families gathered to celebrate their success. Mrs. Caldwell confided to Agnes at the grocery store that her husband wasn't sleeping well. He tosses and turns all night. She whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening. Sometimes he talks in his sleep about keeping secrets safe. I don't know what he means, but it's wearing him down. Police Chief Bob Garrison took to drinking heavily at Murphy's Tavern every night after work. His wife, Betty, told her sister that he had started having terrible nightmares. He wakes up screaming about water and rocks, Betty said with worry in her voice. He keeps saying he's sorry over and over, but he won't tell me what he's sorry for. Dr. Wesley Thornton sold his medical practice within 6 months and moved his family to Atlanta. He claimed he wanted to be closer to his grandchildren, but everyone noticed how quickly he packed up and left town. The network of powerful men was slowly falling apart, but the damage had already been done. Other changes came to Millbrook that no one wanted to talk about. Families with young children began moving away quietly. They would put their houses up for sale and leave within weeks, claiming they had found better jobs in other cities. The Chen family closed their laundry business and moved to California. We go where Lucy can feel safe, Mr. Chen explained in his broken English before they loaded their belongings into a moving truck. The Hendricks family moved to Nashville, unable to bear staying in a place where their son's abuser walked free and their protector had been silenced. One by one, the families who had trusted Sister Magdalena packed up and left Millbrook behind. The town's economy began to suffer. Main Street businesses closed when customers moved away. The school enrollment dropped. Young people graduated high school and left for colleges in big cities, never returning home. Millbrook was dying slowly, poisoned by its own secrets. Agnes Murphy refused to let Sister Magdalena's memory disappear. She started a small memorial garden behind the Catholic Church, planting white roses and placing a simple wooden cross among the flowers. For Sister Magdalena, she would tell visitors, she loved roses, and she loved children more than her own life. The town council voted to remove the memorial within a month. They claimed it was inappropriate and stirred up unnecessary controversy. But Agnes replanted the roses in her own backyard and tended them faithfully every day. People began to whisper, quietly at first, then more boldly as the years passed. Mrs. Patterson, who cleaned Judge Caldwell's house twice a week, mentioned seeing him burn papers in his fireplace for 3 straight nights after Halloween. "Big stack of documents," she told her friend at the beauty parlor. "Burned them all to ash." Joe Miller, who worked at the gas station on Highway 9, remembered Dr. Thornton's expensive car coming in for repairs the week after Sister Magdalena disappeared. "Had mud all over the tires and scratches down both sides," Joe recalled, "like it had been driven through rough woods or something." Betty Garrison, the police chief's wife, let slip to her sister during Christmas dinner that her husband kept a locked box in their basement. "He told me if I ever looked inside, he'd kill me," she whispered. What kind of husband says that to his wife? These whispers created a web of suspicion that hung over Millbrook like morning fog. People began to wonder what really happened to Sister Magdalena Wright, and why so many important men seemed nervous and guilty after she disappeared. But the answers lay buried with her Bible, waiting for the right person to find them. Children continued to disappear occasionally, though less frequently than before. The network had been disrupted, but not destroyed. New faces joined the conspiracy, younger men hungry for power and willing to keep terrible secrets to get it. But they were more careful now. They remembered the nun who had almost exposed them, and they made sure no one else would get that close to the truth again. By 1980, Sister Magdalena Wright had become a ghost story that parents used to frighten their children into obedience. "Don't wander into the woods alone," mothers would warn, "or you'll end up like the nun who asked too many questions." Some people refused to let her memory die completely. Agnes Murphy continued tending her secret rose garden and collecting. Every story, every whisper, every hint about what really happened that Halloween night, she wrote everything. Down in a journal that she kept hidden under the loose floorboards in her bedroom. Someday, she would tell the roses as she watered them each morning, "Someone will want to know the truth about what happened to you, sister. And when they do, I'll be ready to tell them everything." The oak tree stood guard in the forest, its roots growing deeper around the buried Bible with each passing season. Rain fell and snow melted. Leaves turned colors and dropped to the ground. Years rolled by like water flowing downstream. But the tree remembered everything, and deep in its earthen embrace, Sister Magdalena's final message waited patiently for the right moment to speak again. That moment would come 25 years later, when a hunter named Ezra Blackwood would kneel in the dirt and lift the truth back into the light. The town's shame was about to become the world's knowledge. Ezra Blackwood had never thought of himself as a detective, but finding Sister Magdalena's Bible changed everything. He couldn't stop thinking about her desperate message hidden in the oak tree's roots, or the children she had tried to save before someone silenced her voice. Forever. The next morning, he drove to the Millbrook County Library. The building was old and small, with creaky wooden floors and the smell of dust and ancient books. Mrs. Eunice Foster had been the librarian for 40 years. If anyone remembered what really happened in 1977, it would be her. "I need to look at old newspapers," Ezra told her quietly, "from October and November 1977. Mrs. Foster's eyes went sharp behind her thick glasses. She was 75 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, but her mind was still clear as spring water. "You're the hunter who found something in the woods," she said before he could explain anything else. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it's about her. She didn't need to say Sister Magdalena's name. Everyone in Millbrook knew who "her" meant. Mrs. Foster led him to the back room where old newspapers were stored in tall filing cabinets. She pulled out a thick folder marked October-December 1977 and set it on a wooden table, under a bright lamp. "Terrible thing that happened to that poor woman," she whispered, looking around as if someone might be listening even though they were alone. She was trying to help those children nobody else cared about. Then, one day, gone like smoke. "What children?" Ezra asked, though he already knew part of the answer from Sister Magdalena's notes. Mrs. Foster's eyes darted nervously toward the door. Children who went missing for weeks at a time, then came back different, scared, broken. Sister Magdalena was the only adult in this whole town who asked the right questions about what was happening to them. The newspaper headlines from late 1977 told a story scrubbed clean of truth. "Local nun accepts transfer to Northern Diocese," read one headline from November 3rd. "St. Mary's School welcomes new teacher," announced another from November 10th. But Ezra could read between the lines. He noticed that stories about missing children stopped, appearing in the paper around the same time Sister Magdalena disappeared. He saw obituaries of men who died young in the years that followed, deaths that seemed suspicious when you looked at them all together. Judge Harrison Caldwell died of a heart attack in 1983. He was only 58 years old and had been healthy his whole life. Police Chief Bob Garrison died in a car accident in 1985, driving alone on a straight road on a clear day. Dr. Wesley Thornton was found dead in his new home in Atlanta in 1984, ruled a suicide though. His family insisted he had never shown signs of depression. "Mrs. Foster," Ezra said quietly. "Who else in town might remember what really happened back then?" The librarian hesitated, chewing on her lower lip like she was deciding whether to trust him. Finally, she took a pencil and wrote an address on a scrap of paper. Agnes Murphy owns the boarding house on Elm Street. She was close to Sister Magdalena, closer than anyone else in town. If you want to know the truth, she's the one to ask. Ezra found Agnes Murphy exactly where Mrs. Foster said he would. She was behind the old Catholic church, kneeling in a flower garden and pruning white rose bushes that bloomed even in the October cold. Agnes was 85 years old now, moving slowly but with purpose. Her hair was completely white, pulled back under a faded blue scarf. When she looked up and saw Ezra approaching, her eyes were still bright and intelligent. "You're the hunter who found something important in the woods," she said, before he could introduce himself. It wasn't a question. Ezra nodded and pulled Sister Magdalena's Bible from his jacket. Agnes's weathered hands trembled as she touched the leather cover. "I knew this day would come," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I've been waiting 25 years for someone to find what she hid." Agnes led him to her boarding house, a two-story white building with a wide front porch and flower boxes under every window. Inside, her living room was filled with old furniture and photographs of people who had stayed there over the years. She went to a bookshelf in the corner and moved several volumes aside, revealing a loose board in the wall behind them. From the hidden space, she pulled out a thick journal wrapped in oilcloth. "I wrote down everything," Agnes explained, settling into her favorite chair. "Every conversation, every suspicion, every piece of evidence I could gather. I knew someday someone would need to know the whole truth." According to Agnes's journal, Sister Magdalena had uncovered a network of powerful men who hurt children from the poorest families in Millbrook. The nun had been gathering evidence, systematically, planning to expose them all at once, so they couldn't silence her before the story got out. "She had photographs," Agnes said, her voice growing stronger as she remembered. "Names, dates, witness, statements from the families. She told me she'd hidden everything somewhere safe, where those evil men would never find it." Ezra showed her the letter from inside the Bible. She wrote about a silver locket hidden beneath the third stone from the altar. Do you know what altar she meant? Agnes's eyes widened with understanding. The old church, before they built this new one in 1960, there was a stone altar in the woods where the early settlers held services. It's still there, overgrown with vines and moss, but still there. They drove to the forest in Ezra's pickup truck, Agnes directing him down dirt, roads that were barely visible through the trees. The abandoned altar sat in a small clearing, 5 large stones arranged in a circle with one flat stone in the center that had served as a table for communion. Bread and wine. Ezra counted to the third stone and began digging with a small shovel he kept in his truck. 2 feet down, his fingers touched something metal. A silver locket, tarnished black with age but still intact. Inside the locket were 2 small photographs that made Ezra's stomach turn. One showed a young girl, maybe 8 years old, with tears on her face and bruises on her arms. The other photograph showed a man's hand gripping the child's shoulder. And on one finger was a distinctive ring with a family crest. "Dear God in heaven," Agnes breathed as she looked at the pictures. She actually got proof. She got them. But as Ezra studied the second photograph more carefully, something made his blood run cold. He recognized that ring. He had seen it in family photographs his whole life. The ring belonged to his grandfather, Earl Blackwood. Agnes saw the expression on his face change from hope to horror. "What is it, child?" Ezra couldn't speak for a moment. The man he had idolized his entire life, the grandfather who had taught him to hunt and fish and be honest, had been part of the conspiracy that killed Sister Magdalena. "I'm sorry you had to learn it this way," Agnes said gently, reading the truth in his eyes. "But this is why she died. She was willing to expose anyone, no matter how respected they were or how much it would hurt their families." That evening, Ezra sat in his truck outside his grandfather's old house, now owned by cousins who had no idea what Earl Blackwood had really been. The man buried in Millbrook Cemetery with a headstone that called him beloved father and community leader had helped kill a nun who was trying to protect children. Ezra called Detective Morrison with the state police, a contact he'd made through his hunting guide business. Morrison had helped him with poaching cases in the past and was one of the few law enforcement officers Ezra trusted completely. 25 years is a long time, Ezra, Morrison said when he heard the story. Most of the main suspects are dead. Without living witnesses or victims willing to testify in court, there's not much we can prosecute. What about the families of the children who were hurt? Scattered to the wind. Some moved away, some died, some just want to forget and move on with their lives. And frankly, a lot of people in positions of power don't want this old scandal stirred up again. But Ezra couldn't let it go. Using Agnes's journal and Sister Magdalena's notes, he began tracking down the families she had mentioned. Sarah Hendricks, Tommy's mother, was living in a nursing home in Nashville. When Ezra visited her and showed her Sister Magdalena's Bible, the 80-year-old woman began to cry. "She was the only one who believed us," Sarah said through her tears. "The only adult in that whole town who tried to help my boy. Tommy never got over what they did to him, never spoke about it to anyone, never got married, never had children. He died at 43 from pills and alcohol. They killed him twice, once when he was 8 years old, and again when the pain finally broke him." Lucy Chen was now a retired teacher living in Los Angeles. When Ezra called her, she agreed to fly back to Tennessee to tell her story. "Sister Magdalena was the only person who made me feel safe after what happened," Lucy said. "When they met at the Millbrook Diner, I was 6 years old, and every other adult either didn't believe me or was too scared to help. She believed me, and she promised to make sure it never happened to other children." As word spread that Ezra was investigating Sister Magdalena's disappearance, he began receiving anonymous phone calls. "Let sleeping dogs lie," a gravelly voice warned him one night. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried, just like that nun." Someone slashed his truck tires while he was visiting Agnes Murphy. The next week, his house was broken into, though nothing was stolen. It was a clear message that someone was watching him and didn't want him digging into the past. But Agnes Murphy stood by him every step of the way. "Sister Magdalena died for this truth," she told him. "We owe it to her memory and to those children to see it through to the end." Together, they compiled everything they had found. The photographs from the locket, Agnes's detailed journal, testimony from surviving family members, and Sister Magdalena's own notes, preserved in her Bible. They contacted journalists in Nashville and Atlanta, victims' rights advocates, and law enforcement agencies outside Millbrook's influence. Slowly, a new investigation began to take shape. Modern forensic techniques could analyze evidence that had been ignored decades earlier. DNA testing might identify victims in photographs. Computer databases could track financial records that showed payments to silence families. But the most important evidence was still missing. "Until we find her body," Detective Morrison explained during one of their meetings, "this stays a missing person case, not a murder investigation. Without physical proof that she's dead, we can't charge anyone with killing her." That evening, Agnes called Ezra to her boarding house. She had been quiet all day, lost in memories of things she had never told anyone. "There's something I never mentioned to the police back in 1977, she said. "Something I saw the night Sister Magdalena disappeared." Ezra leaned forward, knowing this could be the breakthrough they needed. "I couldn't sleep that Halloween night. Too much noise outside, too many cars racing around town. So I sat by my bedroom window, watching the street. Around midnight, I saw 3 cars driving slowly toward Miller's quarry. that old limestone pit where they used to mine rock. You think that's where they took her? Agnes nodded, though her eyes were sad. I've wondered about it for 25 years. But back then, I was just an old widow. Who would have believed me against the word of judges and police chiefs? The next morning, Ezra stood at the edge of Miller's quarry. The old mining pit was filled with dark water now, surrounded by limestone cliffs that dropped straight down, for 50 feet. If someone wanted to make a body disappear forever, this would be the perfect place. But recovering anything from those black depths would require professional divers and expensive equipment. It would also require convincing the authorities that it was worth the effort. Sister Magdalena's Bible had started speaking 25 years after her death. Now it was time to make sure everyone heard what she had to say. Miller's quarry had been abandoned since the 1960s, when the limestone company moved their operations to a bigger site 20 miles south. The old pit filled with groundwater over the years, creating a lake surrounded by white stone cliffs that rose like cathedral walls. Local teenagers used to swim there during hot summers until 3 drowning accidents in the 1970s convinced the county to fence it off and post warning signs. Now it sat forgotten, hidden by trees and marked only by rusted chain link and faded "No trespassing" signs. Ezra contacted a police diving team from Nashville. Detective Morrison was still skeptical, but agreed to authorize a search based on Agnes's eyewitness testimony and the evidence they had gathered from Sister Magdalena's Bible. The divers arrived on a cold November morning when frost covered the ground and their breath made clouds in the air. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez led the team, a woman in her 40s who had been diving for the police department for 15 years. Agnes Murphy insisted on being there despite her age and the bitter cold. I've waited 25 years to know for certain what happened to that sweet girl, she told Ezra, wrapping her wool coat tighter around her shoulders. I'm not missing this. As the diving team prepared their equipment, word somehow spread through Millbrook. By noon, a small crowd had gathered along the quarry's edge. Some were curious onlookers who had heard rumors. Others seemed nervous about what might be found in the dark water below. Among the watchers was Marcus Caldwell, Judge Harrison Caldwell's son. He was 52 years old now, a successful lawyer in Nashville who had built his reputation on his father's respected name. When he saw Ezra, his face went pale with anger. "This is harassment of my family's memory," Marcus said, walking up to Ezra with his hands clenched into fists. "My father was a respected judge who served this community for 30 years. These wild accusations you're spreading are supported by photographic evidence," Ezra interrupted, pulling out copies of the pictures. From the silver locket. Marcus's face went white when he saw his father's distinctive family ring in the photograph. The earring had been passed down through 4 generations of Caldwell men, and Marcus wore it now on his own finger. That could be anyone's hand," Marcus stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "The ring has your family crest engraved on it," Ezra said quietly. "I did my research. There's only one ring like that in the county, and it belonged to your father." Marcus turned and walked away quickly, but Ezra noticed him making urgent phone calls to someone. The first dive into Miller's quarry yielded nothing but old car parts, rusted machinery, and decades of trash that people had thrown into the water. The limestone walls made the water extremely cold, and visibility was almost zero in the murky depths. Sergeant Rodriguez surfaced after 20 minutes, shaking her head. "It's like diving in chocolate milk down there. could take days to search this whole area properly. The second dive went deeper, following the underwater cliffs down toward the bottom of the quarry. Rodriguez found more debris, the skeletal remains of fish and small animals, but nothing that looked human. On the third dive, her voice crackled through the radio with excitement. "I've got something down here. Looks like fabric. Dark fabric. That's been in the water a long time." 20 minutes later, she surfaced with a piece of waterlogged cloth in her gloved hands. Even. After 25 years underwater, it was unmistakably part of a nun's black habit. Agnes Murphy began to cry quietly as the medical examiner who had come with the diving team confirmed what they all suspected. "There's more down there," Rodriguez reported, breathing heavily from the cold and exertion. "Looks like clothing wrapped around something heavy, maybe weighted down with rocks." The recovery took 4 hours. Piece by careful piece, they brought up the remains of Sister Magdalena Wright from the bottom of Miller's Quarry. The medical examiner worked quickly but respectfully, documenting everything before the curious crowd could see too much. "Blunt force trauma to the skull," he noted quietly to Detective Morrison. "Consistent with being struck by a heavy object multiple times. The time frame matches your 1977 timeline. But wrapped within the remains of Sister Magdalena's habit was something none of them had expected to find. A metal box, sealed with wax and completely waterproof, had been tied to her body before she was thrown into the quarry. Agnes's hands shook as she watched them open the box. Inside were more photographs, more documents, and most importantly, a small cassette tape recorder with 2 tapes sealed in plastic bags. She kept recording until the very end, Agnes whispered through her tears. Even knowing they were going to kill her, she was still trying to gather evidence. That evening, in the privacy of Agnes's boarding house, they played Sister Magdalena's final recording. Her voice, preserved on magnetic tape, spoke across 25 years with perfect clarity. November 1st, 1977. "If anyone finds this, my name is Sister Magdalena Wright. I am about to be murdered for trying to protect innocent children from evil men. The people responsible are Judge Harrison Caldwell, Police Chief Robert Garrison, Dr. Wesley Thornton, Mayor Earl Blackwood, and at least 6 others whose names are documented in the sealed envelope with this recording." Ezra felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Hearing his grandfather's name spoken by the woman he helped kill was almost too much to bear. These men have been systematically abusing children from poor families for years, using their power and influence to silence victims and threaten families into keeping quiet. I have photographs, witness statements, and evidence of money payments made to keep people from talking. I pray that someday someone will find this recording and bring these men to justice. The children of Millbrook deserve to have their voices heard, even if mine is about to be silenced. Forever. They're coming for me now. I can hear them in the hallway outside my apartment. God forgive them, because they know exactly what they're doing when they hurt innocent people. Tell the families I was trying to help that I did my best. Tell them I never stopped fighting for... The recording ended in a burst of static and the sound of splintering wood. But there was a second tape. This one contained something even more damning than Sister Magdalena's final testimony. Somehow, she had managed to record a phone conversation between Judge Caldwell and Police Chief Garrison made just hours before her disappearance. Caldwell, "She has photographs, Bob. Clear photographs of me with the Chen girl. We have to stop her tonight. Garrison. How do we do that? She's not just going to disappear quietly. Caldwell. Actually, she is. Miller's quarry is 300 feet deep. No one will ever find her body down there. Garrison. Jesus Christ, Harry. You're talking about murder. Caldwell. I'm talking about protecting our families and our community from a troublemaker who wants to destroy everything we've built. Sometimes good men have to do terrible things to protect what matters most. Garrison. What about all the evidence she's been collecting? Caldwell. We'll find it. Search her apartment, her car, everywhere she might have hidden something. Without the evidence and without her testimony, who's going to believe a bunch of poor kids against our word? The conversation went on for another 10 minutes, with the two men planning Sister Magdalena's murder in chilling detail. They discussed how to make her disappearance look like. She had left town voluntarily, how to clean up any evidence she might have left behind, and how to silence the families who might ask questions. The room was completely silent when the tape ended. Even Detective Morrison, who had heard confessions to terrible crimes during his 20-year career, looked sick. "This changes everything," he said finally. "We have a recorded confession to premeditated murder. Even though the main conspirators are dead, we can still prosecute anyone who helped cover it up or continued the abuse." The next morning brought chaos to Millbrook. News vans descended on the small town like an invading army. The story had everything reporters loved: corruption, cover-up, a martyred nun, and a decades-old conspiracy finally exposed. Marcus Caldwell hired a team of expensive lawyers to fight the release of evidence that implicated his father. Other prominent families whose ancestors were named in Sister Magdalena's documents pressured the district attorney to limit the investigation. Some of these families still have money and influence, Detective Morrison warned Ezra. They're going to fight this every step of the way. But Sister Magdalena's recorded testimony was unshakable. Her detailed documentation, preserved in that waterproof box, included bank records showing payments to silence families, photographs of abuse that could be enhanced with modern technology, and audio recordings of threats made against her and the families she was trying to help. Within days, the investigation expanded beyond Millbrook County. FBI agents arrived to examine evidence of a conspiracy that had crossed state lines. Social workers began reviewing decades-old case files that had been mysteriously closed or disappeared from official records. Modern forensic techniques revealed DNA evidence on clothing, photographs, and documents that could potentially identify both victims and perpetrators even after 25 years. 3 men were arrested within the week on charges ranging from obstruction of justice to child endangerment. 2 others fled the state when they learned arrest warrants had been issued. But the most powerful evidence remained Sister Magdalena's own voice, speaking from beyond. The grave with absolute moral clarity. I could have stayed silent and minded my own business. I could have transferred to another parish and lived a quiet, safe life. But when you know children are being hurt, and you have the power to help them, silence becomes the same as helping the abusers. Some truths are worth dying for, especially when they protect the innocent. As November turned to December, indictments began to multiply. The network that Sister Magdalena died trying to expose was finally crumbling, 25 years after her sacrifice. But for Ezra, The hardest truth was still to come. Hidden in Sister Magdalena's final evidence was information about his grandfather that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his family's history. The biggest revelation was yet to be discovered. The phone call came on a snowy December morning when Ezra was splitting firewood behind his house, trying to work off the anger and confusion that had been eating at him for weeks. Detective Morrison's voice sounded different, cautious, like he was carrying news that might break something. "Well, need to meet," Morrison said. "There's something about your grandfather you need to know. Something that changes everything." They met at Betty's Diner outside Millbrook, away from curious eyes and wagging tongues. Morrison slid a thick manila folder across the scratched Formica table. "We found Earl Blackwood's personal records," Morrison began carefully. "Bank statements, correspondence, private documents that his family donated to the County Historical Society after he died. Nobody ever looked at them closely until now." Ezra's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were letters, photographs, and financial records spanning nearly 20 years. "Your grandfather was sending money to families," Morrison continued, watching Ezra's face carefully. "Substantial amounts. Look at the dates." The payments began in January 1978, just 2 months after Sister Magdalena's murder, and continued until Earl Blackwood's death in 1995. Thousands of dollars went to the Hendricks family, the Chens, and other victims' families. Not small amounts, but life-changing sums that could pay for medical care, therapy, and fresh starts in new cities. "I don't understand," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If he was part of the conspiracy that killed her." "Read the letters," Morrison said gently. With shaking hands, Ezra unfolded a handwritten note dated January 15, 1978. "Dear Mrs. Hendricks, I know no amount of money can undo what was done to Tommy or bring back the brave woman who tried to help him. I was a coward who stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I chose my reputation over a child's safety, and I will carry that shame to my grave. This money won't buy forgiveness, but I hope it will help Tommy get the medical care he needs. Please use it to give him the best life possible. A guilty man trying to find some small piece of redemption. Earl Blackwood." Similar letters went to other families. In each one, Earl expressed deep remorse and acknowledged his failure to protect the children when he had the power to do so. "He wasn't one of the abusers," Morrison explained, his voice kind but firm. "According to everything we've found, he was a witness who kept quiet. Sister Magdalena had approached him for help about 3 weeks before she disappeared, and he refused out of fear for his own position and reputation." Ezra felt the world spinning around him. So she died, partly because he wouldn't help her? That's how he saw it. But after her death, he tried to make things right in the only way he knew. How? Anonymous donations, pressure behind the scenes, to help victim families relocate, even funding therapy for some of the children who were hurt. Morrison pulled out another set of documents. "There's more. Your grandfather was secretly cooperating with a private investigator from Atlanta who was trying to build a case against the conspiracy. He provided financial records, inside information about cover-ups, even witness statements, when he could do so safely." The investigator's notes painted a picture of Earl Blackwood as a man tormented by his own cowardice, spending 17 years trying to atone for one moment of weakness. "Why? Didn't this investigation go anywhere?" Ezra asked. Your grandfather died of a heart attack in March 1995, just weeks before the investigator was ready to go public with the evidence. Without Earl's testimony and financial support, the case fell apart. Ezra stared at a photograph in the file, his grandfather shaking hands with the private investigator outside a Nashville hotel. Earl looked older than his 60 years, with deep lines around his eyes and gray hair that had turned white with stress. Your grandfather carried that guilt every day for 17 years, Morrison said. According to the investigator's notes, it literally killed him. The stress, the drinking, the sleepless nights. His heart just gave out. That evening, Ezra sat in his grandfather's old study, surrounded by hunting trophies and family photographs that looked different now. Everything he thought he knew about Earl Blackwood had been turned upside down. He searched through his grandfather's desk, looking for something, anything, that might help him understand the man who had raised him. In the bottom drawer, behind old tax records and forgotten receipts, he found a locked metal box. The key was taped to the bottom of the drawer. Inside was a letter addressed to "My Family" in Earl's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm dead. And maybe that's for the best. I've carried a secret that has poisoned every day of my life since Halloween 1977. A brave woman came to me for help. Sister Magdalena Wright had discovered terrible things. About men I called friends. Men I had known and trusted for decades. She begged me to use my influence as mayor to protect the children they were hurting. I refused. I was afraid of scandal, afraid of losing everything I had worked my whole life to build. I told myself she was probably exaggerating, that surely things weren't as bad as she claimed. 3 days later, she was dead. I've spent 17 years trying to atone for my cowardice. I've given money to the families, used what influence I had left to help them quietly, and passed information to investigators when I could do so without putting anyone else in danger. But nothing can bring back Sister Magdalena, and nothing can undo the suffering that continued. Because I chose silence over courage. If this letter ever becomes public, I want you to know that I died ashamed of my weakness, but proud that my grandson carries the Blackwood name with more honor than I ever did. Don't let my failures define our family's legacy. Be the man I should have been. Earl Blackwood, March 1995. Ezra sat alone with his grandfather's confession, tears streaming down his face. Earl had died, just weeks before the private investigation might have finally brought justice to Millbrook. Agnes Murphy found him there hours later, having let herself in with the spare key Earl had given her years before his death. "I wondered when you'd find that letter," she said gently, settling into the chair across from his grandfather's desk. "You knew about this?" "Your grandfather came to see me many times over the years. He was tortured by what happened, especially after he learned the full truth about what those men were doing to children. He'd sit in my kitchen and cry like a baby, asking what he could do to make things right. He could have spoken up," Ezra said bitterly. "He could have saved her life." "Yes, he could have," Agnes agreed without trying to make excuses. "And he knew that better than anyone. But he also tried to save others afterward, in his own broken way." Agnes pulled a small photograph from her purse, Earl Blackwood kneeling at her secret rose garden, placing fresh flowers at the base of each bush. "He came every Sunday for 15 years, she said softly. "Never missed a week, rain or shine." He'd tend those roses like they were his penance, like caring for them might somehow honor Sister Magdalena's memory. Ezra stared at the photograph. His grandfather, the man he thought he knew completely, had been living a double life of guilt and attempted redemption. The Chen family's escape to California? Agnes continued. Earl paid for the moving truck and their first year's rent. Tommy Hendrix's medical care. Earl covered every doctor bill. 3 other families who needed to disappear quietly. He helped them relocate safely and start new lives. But it wasn't enough, Ezra whispered. No, it wasn't enough. Nothing could be enough to balance that scale. But your grandfather spent the last 17 years of his life trying anyway. Agnes reached across the desk and took Ezra's hand in her weathered fingers. Sister Magdalena believed in redemption, she said. She believed people could change, could choose to do better, even after they'd made terrible mistakes. Your grandfather proved her right, even if it came too late to save her life. Over the next few days, as news of Earl's secret activities spread through the investigation, a more complex picture emerged. The private investigator he'd been working with had extensive files showing Earl's cooperation in trying to expose the remaining members of the conspiracy. Financial records showed he'd bankrupted himself helping victim families. Medical records revealed the stress had given him ulcers, high blood pressure, and eventually the heart attack that killed him. Most importantly, his information had helped identify newer members of the abuse network, younger men who had joined the conspiracy in the 1980s and were still alive to face prosecution. Your grandfather may have failed Sister Magdalena, Detective Morrison told Ezra, but his 17 years of penance helped us catch criminals who were still hurting children. In the end, he did choose courage over cowardice, just too late to save the woman who needed his help most. As Christmas approached, Ezra made a decision that would have made both his grandfather and Sister Magdalena proud. He used his inheritance from Earl's estate to establish a foundation providing legal aid and counseling services to families of abused children. The Earl Blackwood Redemption Fund would be housed at the Sister Magdalena Right Advocacy Center, ensuring that his grandfather's money would continue the work the brave nun had died trying to finish. But the story wasn't over yet. Hidden in the deepest files of Earl's cooperation with the private investigator was evidence that would lead to the final confrontation with the last living members of the conspiracy. Justice was coming for Sister Magdalena Wright, 25, years late but unstoppable now. The trial of the surviving conspirators began in January 2003, in a courthouse filled with reporters, victims' families, and curious onlookers who had traveled from across the state. Snow fell outside the tall windows as lawyers arranged their papers and prepared to fight over secrets that had been buried for a quarter century. 3 men sat at the defendant's table, their faces pale under the bright courtroom lights. Robert Garrison Jr., now 55, was the former police chief's son, who had helped destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. Dr. Marcus Thornton, nephew of the deceased Dr. Wesley Thornton, had continued the abuse well into the 1980s. William Caldwell, Judge Harrison Caldwell's younger brother, had used his position as a county social worker to identify vulnerable children for the network. Sister Magdalena's Bible sat on the prosecutor's table like a silent witness, its leather cover worn smooth by Agnes Murphy's faithful hands over the years. Next to it lay the cassette tapes that had preserved the nun's final testimony and the damning phone conversations between the original conspirators. District Attorney Patricia Williams stood to address the jury, her voice clear and strong in the hushed courtroom. 25 years ago, a brave woman died because she refused to let powerful men hurt 8 innocent children. Sister Magdalena Wright gave her life to protect the most vulnerable members of our community. Today, we finally have the chance to honor her sacrifice by bringing her killer's accomplices to justice. Ezra testified on the second day, his voice steady as he described finding the Bible buried in the oak tree's roots. He held nothing back about his grandfather's role, speaking the painful truth, even though it humiliated his family name. Earl Blackwood was a coward who chose silence when he should have chosen courage, Ezra told the packed courtroom. But he spent the rest of his life trying to make up for that failure. I'm here today because he would want me to finish what Sister Magdalena started. Agnes Murphy took the stand next, her 86-year-old voice still strong despite her age. She carried her detailed journal and testified about the night Sister Magdalena disappeared, about the years of whispered secrets, and about the powerful men who thought they could bury the truth along with their victim. That young woman died because she believed children mattered more than rich men's reputations, Agnes said, looking directly at the defendants. She was right then, and she's still right now. But the most powerful testimony came from the survivors themselves. Lucy Chen, now 51, and a retired teacher, flew in from California to face the men who had destroyed her childhood. I was 6 years old when they hurt me, she said, her voice calm but filled with steel. I didn't have words for what they did then, but I do now. Sister Magdalena saw my pain and believed me when no other adult would. She died trying to protect children like me. Elena Hendricks, Tommy's sister, read a letter her brother had written before his death in 1995. I never forgot the black nun who tried to save us kids. I never got to thank her for believing me when everyone else said I was lying. Maybe someday someone will find her and let her know that some of us remembered her kindness even when the world forgot her name. The defense lawyers fought back hard, claiming the evidence was too old and the witnesses unreliable. They argued that Sister Magdalena had been mentally unstable, making wild accusations against respected citizens based on children's confused memories. Sister Magdalena Wright clearly suffered from delusions, Marcus Caldwell's expensive attorney argued. She made serious accusations against pillars of the community based on the confused testimony of troubled children. There's no solid proof that any abuse actually occurred. That's when District Attorney Williams played her final card. Your Honor, the state has one more piece of evidence to present. The courtroom fell completely silent as Williams approached the tape player. Hidden in the deepest part of Sister Magdalena's waterproof box had been a third cassette tape. So water-damaged, it had taken months of restoration work by FBI technicians to make it playable. This recording was made by Sister Magdalena Wright on the evening of October 30th, 1977, less than 24 hours before her murder. The tape began to play, and Sister Magdalena's voice filled the courtroom with perfect clarity. This is Sister Magdalena Wright, speaking on October 30th, 1977. Tomorrow I plan to drive to Nashville with evidence that will expose a network of child abusers in Millbrook County. If something happens to me before I can tell this story, I want people to know exactly what I discovered and why I had to risk everything to stop it. For the next 20 minutes, Sister Magdalena's voice provided devastating testimony about each defendant. She named specific crimes, gave detailed descriptions of abuse, and even included recorded phone conversations she had secretly taped. William Caldwell uses his job at social services to find children from poor families. He tells parents their kids need special medical examinations and takes them to Dr. Thornton's private clinic after hours. Robert Garrison Jr. destroys any police reports that families try to file. They work together like a machine designed to hurt children and silence anyone who tries to stop them. Quiets. The recording included audio of phone calls between the defendants, planning which children to target next, and discussing how to keep their activities secret. I have photographs of what they do to these children. I have medical records showing injuries that were never reported. I have bank statements showing payments made to families to keep them quiet. Most importantly, I have the courage to speak for children who are too young and too scared to speak for themselves. If they kill me for this truth, I pray that someone will find these recordings and finish what I started. These children deserve justice. They deserve to be believed. They deserve adults who will protect them instead of preying on them. The courtroom was completely silent when the tape ended. Several jurors were crying. Even the judge looked shaken by what they had heard. Sister Magdalena Wright had literally testified at her own murder trial, her voice speaking across 25 years with unshakable moral authority. Within hours of hearing the recording, all three defendants changed their pleas to guilty. Robert Garrison Jr. received 20 years for obstruction of justice, evidence, tampering, and conspiracy. Dr. Marcus Thornton was sentenced to 30 years for multiple counts of child abuse and running a criminal enterprise. William Caldwell got 35 years for child endangerment, abuse of his position as a social worker, and being the network's primary recruiter. But the legal victory felt bittersweet to Ezra. Sister Magdalena was still dead. The children she had tried to save had still suffered. Justice had come 25 years too late for too many people. After the sentencing, Agnes Murphy found him sitting alone on the courthouse steps, staring at the Bible that had started everything. "She did it?" Agnes said, settling down beside him despite the cold January air. She kept her promise to those children. Did she? 3 men in prison, but dozens of children's lives were still destroyed. Tommy. Hendrix still drank himself to death. Lucy, Chen still has nightmares. My grandfather still died, carrying guilt that ate him alive. Agnes was quiet for a moment, watching snow fall on the courthouse lawn. Child, that's not how justice works in this world. It's not about erasing the past or making everything perfect. It's about choosing to do better going forward. She handed him a small wooden cross, identical to the one Sister Magdalena had given her years before. Sister Magdalena knew she might die for telling the truth, but she also knew that truth has power, even when it's buried for 25 years. Look around you. Ezra looked at the courthouse steps, where survivors were hugging their families and talking to reporters. He saw children's advocates who had traveled from across the country to witness the trial. He noticed the new laws being discussed by legislators who had been moved by Sister Magdalena's story. Her voice didn't die when they killed her, Agnes continued. It got stronger. Every child who finds courage to speak up, every adult who chooses to listen and believe, every community that refuses to look away from uncomfortable truths. That's Sister Magdalena's legacy. As winter turned to spring, the ripple effects of the trial continued to spread. The Sister Magdalena Right Advocacy Center expanded to serve 3 counties. New laws were passed requiring better background checks for people working with children. Training programs were established to help teachers and social workers recognize signs of abuse. Most importantly, the conspiracy of silence that had protected predators for generations was finally broken. Children were safer because Sister Magdalena Right had refused to stay quiet, even knowing it would cost her everything. Her Bible, which had waited 25 years to tell its story, was placed in a place of honor at the Advocacy Center. But its real power wasn't in the evidence it contained. Its power was in the courage it represented. The courage to speak truth when silence would be easier, to protect the vulnerable when it would be safer to look away, and to choose what's right over what's convenient. Sister Magdalena Right had won her final battle, not through force or influence, but through the simple, unstoppable power of truth. Spring came early to Millbrook County in 2003, as if the earth itself was celebrating the end of a long, dark winter. 6 months after the trial, the town began the slow process of healing wounds that had festered for 25 years. The Catholic diocese officially recognized Sister Magdalena Right as a martyr who died protecting children. Father Mackenzie, the elderly priest who had replaced her so long ago, announced that the church was beginning the process for her canonization as a saint. Sister Magdalena gave her life for the most sacred duty of any adult, protecting innocent children, Father Mackenzie said during a special memorial service held at the New Catholic Church. Her courage echoes through time, reminding us that some voices cannot be silenced by evil. The service was attended by hundreds of people, many who had never even lived in Millbrook when Sister Magdalena was alive. They came from across Tennessee and neighboring states, survivors of abuse, children's advocates, families who had been inspired by her story to speak up about their own experiences. Lucy Chen spoke at the service, her voice steady and strong, as she addressed the packed church. Sister Magdalena taught us that being small doesn't mean being powerless. She was just one woman in a small town, facing men who controlled everything. But she had something they didn't have: the absolute certainty that protecting children was worth any sacrifice. Side Antihuntur, Elena Hendricks planted the first tree in a memorial grove behind the church. For my brother, Tommy, and for all the children Sister Magdalena tried to protect, she said, her hands gentle as she patted soil around the young oak's roots. But the most meaningful moment came when Agnes Murphy, now 87 and moving, slowly with her walker, stood to address the congregation. The woman who had kept Sister Magdalena's memory alive for 25 years faced the crowd with quiet dignity. I knew Sister Magdalena for only 14 months, but she changed my life forever. She showed me that kindness isn't weakness, that speaking truth isn't making trouble, and that some fights are worth having even when you know you might lose. Agnes's voice grew stronger as she continued. For 25 years, I tended her roses and kept her secrets, waiting for the day when justice would finally come. Today, I can rest easy, knowing her voice has been heard and her sacrifice has been honored. The town itself struggled with the revelations. Property values dropped as the scandal made national news. Several businesses closed when customers stayed away. The tourism industry, never strong in Millbrook, disappeared completely. But something else began to happen. New families started moving to town. People drawn by the low cost of living and the community's newfound commitment to transparency and child protection. The Millbrook Children's Advocacy Center opened in the renovated building that had once housed Judge Caldwell's law office. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same space where a corrupt judge had once planned crimes against children now housed trained counselors, legal advocates, and social workers dedicated to protecting vulnerable kids. Ezra found himself drawn into this work despite having no formal training. He sold his hunting guide business and used the money to help fund the EEE Advocacy Center. The skills that had made him a good tracker, patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see what others missed, made him an excellent victim advocate. "I can't undo what my grandfather failed to do," he told Agnes one afternoon as they worked together in Sister Magdalena's memorial garden. "But I can try to be the person she needed when she came asking for help." The garden had grown over the years. What started as Agnes's secret rose bushes had expanded to include flowers donated by supporters from around the country. There were white roses for purity, yellow ones for hope, and red ones for the courage Sister Magdalena had shown. One day in late spring, a young woman approached Ezra as he was pruning the roses. She looked to be about 30, with kind eyes and the confident bearing of someone who had overcome great hardship. "Are you Ezra Blackwood?" she asked. "Yes. My name is Maria Santos. I was one of the children Sister Magdalena was investigating when she died." Ezra's hands stilled on the rose stems. This was the first victim he had met who actually remembered Sister Magdalena personally. "I was 7 years old," Maria continued, settling onto the bench that had been placed among Tatiway roses. "My family had just moved here from Mexico. We didn't speak much English, had no money, no connections. We were perfect targets for men who preyed on families nobody else cared about." She paused, looking at the memorial plaque that bore Sister Magdalena's name and the dates of her short life. "Dr. Thornton was supposed to be treating me for a broken arm. My father couldn't afford insurance, so we were grateful that this important doctor would help us. But Dr. Thornton hurt me in ways that had nothing to do with fixing broken bones." Ezra felt sick hearing this, but he knew Maria needed to tell her story. "Sister Magdalena found out somehow. She came to our house one evening, brought groceries for my mother, played games with me and my little brothers. She spoke Spanish. Did you know that? She had learned it just so she could talk to families like ours." Maria smiled at the memory, despite the pain behind it. "She gave me a little wooden cross, just like this one." Maria pulled out a cross identical to the one Agnes had given Ezra years earlier. She told me, in perfect Spanish, "God sees you, Mija. God loves you, and I won't let anyone hurt you anymore." "What happened to your family?" "Sister Magdalena came to our house at midnight 2 days before she disappeared. She brought envelopes full of cash, money for bus tickets, for a POW security deposit on a new apartment, for a fresh start somewhere safe. She had arranged everything." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she continued. "She told my parents that bad men were planning to hurt more children, and that our family needed to leave town immediately. We moved to California that very night, 3 days before Halloween." "So she saved you?" She saved my whole family. We never knew exactly what we were running from until I read about the trial in the newspaper. But we trusted her completely because she was the only adult who had shown us kindness without expecting anything in return. Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I'm a social worker now, specializing in immigrant children's rights. This is my donation to the Advocacy Center, $50,000. It's what I've been saving for years, waiting for the right way to honor Sister Magdalena's memory. Ezra was speechless. There's something else, Maria said. I never forgot her last words to me. She said, someday, Mija, you'll have the power to protect other children the way I'm protecting you now. When that day comes, remember that courage is contagious. As Maria walked away, Ezra understood something that had been growing in his heart for months. Sister Magdalena's legacy wasn't just about exposing the conspiracy or bringing criminals to justice. It was about all the lives she had touched, all the seeds of courage she had planted, all the children who grew up to become protectors themselves, because someone had once protected them. The ripples of her sacrifice were still spreading 25 years later. Every child who felt safe enough to report abuse, every adult who chose to listen and believe, every community that refused to look away from uncomfortable truths, all of it connected back to a young nun who had chosen courage over safety. Agnes Murphy passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm June morning, exactly 26 years after Sister Magdalena's disappearance. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched through her faithful witness. Ezra inherited Agnes's journal and her responsibility as keeper of Sister Magdalena's memory. But he also inherited something more precious, the IBE, understanding that healing comes not from forgetting painful truths, but from transforming them into sources of strength and wisdom. The town of Millbrook would never be the same. The conspiracy had been exposed, the criminals punished, and the victims finally heard. But the most important change was in the hearts of people, who learned that ordinary individuals could choose extraordinary courage when children needed protection. Sister Magdalena Wright's voice would continue speaking through every person who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. October 31st, 2007 marked 30 years since Sister Magdalena's murder. But instead of being a day of sadness, it had become something beautiful. Every Halloween, people gathered at the oak tree where Ezra had found her Bible to celebrate courage instead of mourning loss. The forest looked different now. What had once been a lonely spot hidden in the woods was now part of the Sister Magdalena Wright Memorial Trail. Wooden signs marked the path, telling the story of the nun who died protecting children. School groups visited regularly, learning about the power of speaking up for others. At the base of the massive oak tree, someone had placed fresh white roses. The tree itself bore a bronze plaque that read, "In this place, Sister Magdalena Wright buried the truth that would outlive her killers." Her courage echoes through time, reminding us that some voices cannot be silenced. This year, Ezra wasn't alone for the memorial gathering. Agnes Murphy had passed away 4 years earlier, but her legacy lived on in the dozens of people who came to honor Sister Magdalena's memory. Lucy Chen had flown in from Los Angeles, where she now ran a foundation helping immigrant families navigate the legal system. She brought 3 of her former students, young people who had found courage to report abuse because their teacher had taught them about the nun, who refused to stay quiet. Maria Santos came from Phoenix, where she directed a center for children, who had been trafficked across the border. She brought a letter written by one of the children she had helped. Ms. Santos told us about Sister Magdalena Wright and how one person's courage can change everything. Last month, I told the police about my uncle who was hurting me. I was scared, but I remembered the nun who died rather than stay quiet. Because of her example, I found my voice. Elena Hendricks had driven up from Nashville with her teenage daughter, Rachel. I named her after Sister Magdalena Rachel Wright, Elena explained. I wanted my daughter to grow up, knowing that standing up for others is worth any risk. But the day's most meaningful moment came when a shy 15-year-old girl stepped forward. She had straight black hair and nervous eyes, and she clutched a handwritten letter in her trembling hands. "My name is Ruby Garrison," she said quietly. "I'm the granddaughter of Robert Garrison, the police chief who helped kill Sister Magdalena." The crowd fell completely silent. Ruby's voice shook as she continued. "I've lived my whole life carrying shame about my family name. Kids at school whisper about it, call me murderer's granddaughter. For years, I wanted to change my name and pretend I wasn't related to him." Tears ran down her face as she unfolded her letter. But then I learned about Sister Magdalena, really learned about her, not just the whispered stories. I read her writings, studied her life, understood what she died for, and I realized something important. Ruby's voice grew stronger. "I can't change what my grandfather did, but I can choose to live differently. I can choose courage over cowardice, truth over lies." She read from her letter. "Dear Sister Magdalena, my grandfather helped kill you, and I can't change that terrible fact. But I can choose to honor your memory instead of hiding from his shame. I'm starting college next year to study social work. I want to protect children the way you tried to protect them. I want to use my voice for good, to make up for the evil my grandfather chose. I can't undo his sins, but I can make sure your sacrifice wasn't meaningless. I promise to be the person he should have been. Ruby Garrison." The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then Ezra stepped forward and embraced the young woman. "Sister Magdalena would be proud of you," he said gently. "You're not responsible for your grandfather's choices, but you get to make your own. And you're choosing beautifully." Lucy Chen joined them, placing a hand on Ruby's shoulder. "The bravest thing you can do is transform your family's legacy from one of harm to one of healing. Sister Magdalena believed in redemption, and she would believe in you." As the ceremony concluded, Ezra found himself thinking about how far they had all come. The Millbrook Children's Advocacy Center now served 3 counties and had trained workers in 12 states. Sister Magdalena's story was taught in social work schools, seminary classes, and ethics courses across the country. A scholarship in her name sent 20 disadvantaged students to college every year. Her writings had been published in a book that was required reading for anyone working with vulnerable children. Most importantly, children were safer because of her sacrifice. Reporting systems had been strengthened. Background checks were more thorough. Communities were more willing to listen when children tried to tell their stories. The conspiracy of silence that had protected predators for generations was finally broken in Millbrook and beyond. Other towns had begun their own investigations into powerful men who had abused their positions. Sister Magdalena's courage had started a wave of accountability that continued to spread. As the sun set through the oak's ancient branches, Ezra opened Sister Magdalena's Bible, now permanently housed in the county museum, but borrowed for special occasions like this one. He read aloud from her final recorded words. "I pray that someday someone will find these recordings and bring these men to justice. The children deserve to have their voices heard, even if mine is silenced." "Sister Magdalena," he said to the gathering dusk, "your voice was never silenced. It echoes in every child who finds courage to speak up, every adult who chooses to listen, every community that refuses to look away from hard truths." Maria Santos placed her weathered hand on the oak's massive trunk. "Your work continues through all of us," she whispered. "Every child we protect, every family we help, every person who finds courage because of your example." Ruby Garrison, the police chief's granddaughter, who had chosen redemption over shame, placed a single white rose at the base of the memorial plaque. "Thank you for showing us that courage is a choice," she said. "I choose to follow your example, no matter how difficult the path might be." As the crowd began to disperse, leaving flowers and candles at the base of the great tree, Ezra stayed behind for a few final moments, alone. The oak stood eternal, its roots deep in the same earth that had once hidden Sister Magdalena's Bible. The tree had witnessed her final desperate act of faith, keeping her secrets safe until the right person found them at the right time. Now it stood as a living monument to the truth that one person's courage could light fires that burned away decades of darkness. Sister Magdalena Wright had been silenced for only 25 years. Her voice would echo through eternity in every person brave enough to protect the innocent. The wind whispered through the oak's branches, and for a moment, Ezra could almost hear her speaking, not words of sadness or anger, but of hope. Hope that good people would continue, choosing courage. Hope that children would grow up safe and protected. Hope that her sacrifice had planted seeds of justice that would bloom in gardens she would never see. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ezra walked back toward his truck, carrying Sister Magdalena's Bible under his arm. Tomorrow he would return it to the museum where thousands of visitors came each year to learn her story. But tonight, walking through the forest where a brave woman had hidden the truth that would outlive her killers, he understood something profound. Some voices are too powerful to be silenced by evil. Some truths are too important to stay buried forever. And some courage echoes through time, inspiring generation after generation to choose what's right over what's easy, to protect the vulnerable instead of the powerful, and to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Sister Magdalena Wright's legacy would live on as long as there were people willing to listen to her voice and follow her example of sacrificial love. Sister Magdalena Wright's courage reminds us that one person can change the world by refusing to stay silent when others need protection. Her voice still echoes today through everyone who chooses to stand up for what's right. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let us know your city or country. We love connecting with listeners from around the world who believe in spreading kindness and justice. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button to help us reach more people who need to hear Sister Magdalena's message of courage. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every subscriber helps us share more stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things to protect others. There's another incredible story of courage waiting for you right now. Click on the video appearing on your screen to discover how one person's bravery changed everything. Thank you for listening. And remember, your voice matters too. Keep spreading kindness, and we'll see you in the next story.